Last few Sundays, we've started a series based on the Four Agreements, a book by Don Miguel Ruiz. The best-selling book that he put out several years ago is based on ancient Toltec wisdom, over 1,000 years old, handed down over the years in his native Mexico. And his basic premise is that we are each living in our own dream of what the world is like, based on what we've agreed to, what we have accepted as being the truth. We know that we see the world not as it is, but as we are. That's a fundamental truth of being. Our lives are very much the result of what we've accepted as being the truth. And many of the things we accepted were beneficial. Don't take candy from strangers. Always look both ways before crossing the street. Some of the things that we accepted were wrong. Don't sit too close to the TV or you'll ruin your vision. If you swallow your gum, it'll stay in your stomach for 7 years. Don't go outside with wet hair during the winter because you'll catch your death of cold. We've accepted all these things because of another thing that we were told. Don't question your parents. Now, you may have had a similar experience with religious teachings. Growing up, if you asked too many questions about things that didn't make sense to you, you were probably told that you mustn't ask such things. They are the way they are, and you must accept them on faith. And this continues into adulthood. We agree to accept certain things as true. And when those things come into conflict with different things that other people have agreed to, we experience trouble, which can run the gamut from minor irritations to world wars. Don Miguel's solution for this is to replace old agreements with new ones. And that's a very science of mind thing to do. We know, for instance, that it's not enough to stop thinking negative thoughts, because in our attempt to suppress negative thoughts, we're actually focusing our energy on the negatives. So the only effective way really to get rid of negative thoughts is to replace them with positive thoughts. In fact, I think it's safe to say that because of the agreements that society at large has made about life, if you're not deliberately, consciously, purposefully thinking positive thoughts, you will likely, by default, be thinking negative ones. So, Don Miguel's 4 agreements are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. And we've covered the first agreement, be impeccable with your word. Being impeccable with your word means much more than just being honest with yourself and others. It does mean that, of course, but it also means treating your word as a sacred trust, saying what you mean, meaning what you say, and making sure that your words are in integrity with who you truly are. And last week we looked at the second agreement, don't take anything personally. So often we allow ourselves to get upset by things that others say or do. But the truth is that nothing that other people do is because of you. It's because of themselves. All people have their own agreements, so they live in their own dream, their own mind. They're in a completely different world from the one we live in. And even if others insult you directly, it has nothing to do with you. What they say, what they do, and the opinions they hurl are according to the agreements they have made in their own minds. So, if they're attacking you directly, taking things personally means you've agreed to share in whatever rotten mood they're in. Their problem now becomes your problem, but only because you've agreed to swim in their polluted pond. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. So far, it's pretty simple, right? A few clear statements, accompanied by some examples that we can relate to, and voila, we have the concept. Simple, but not always easy. It's a little bit like playing golf. You hit a ball with a club and make it go into a hole. It's about as simple a sport as you can imagine. And yet, it's so difficult that people who can get that little ball into that little hole consistently make millions of dollars. So this week we'll be talking about the third agreement. Don't make assumptions. Another simple idea. It's much easier said than done. We all make assumptions every day. We assume, for instance, that when the traffic light turns green, it's safe to drive through the intersection. But it might not be. An impaired driver might be running a red light. Most of you see me every week, and you know that I wear glasses. So you may assume that these are the same old glasses that you're used to seeing, but they're not. These are brand new. Now, some of you may have assumed that I broke my old glasses and had to get new ones. Some of you may have assumed that I just had my annual eye exam and got a new prescription, and therefore I bought some new glasses. But very few of you would assume that these aren't even glasses at all. There are no lenses in here. These are just empty frames. Well, oh, there are people here. We tend to make assumptions about everything. And the problem with making assumptions is that we believe they are the truth. We make assumptions about what others are doing and thinking. And assumptions are another way that we take things personally. And when we do, we blame them for what we have assumed they are doing or thinking. There are so many things that we don't know. But instead of asking questions when we don't know something, we start making assumptions. We have a powerful imagination, and we start to imagine all kinds of ideas and stories, and we imagine what other people are doing and what they're thinking and what they're saying about us. Don Miguel uses an example of seeing a stranger that you find attractive. He writes, "You are walking in a mall and you see a person you like. That person turns to you and smiles and then walks away. You can make a lot of assumptions just based on this one experience. With these assumptions, you can create a whole fantasy, and you really want to believe this fantasy and make it real. A whole dream begins to form just from your assumptions, and you can believe, oh, this person really likes me. In your mind, a whole relationship begins from that. Maybe you even get married in fantasy land, but the fantasy is in your own mind, in your personal dream." Well, that may sound a little bit far-fetched, but we've all done things like that. Another example. Let's say you're out shopping and you see a friend who ignores you. You then assume that she's mad at you, and then you create a story about why she's mad at you, and then you start fuming about it, and now you are mad at her. And if you had asked why she ignored you, it might have been as simple as she didn't see you, or she just received devastating news and her mind was totally focused on that. But most people don't take the time to ask questions, and they just let their situations fester in their head. Making assumptions happens in the mind, and it causes you to create all kinds of scenarios that get out of control and create angst. If someone tells us something, we make assumptions, and if they don't tell us something, we make assumptions. We can take offense at something someone said because we assume the person meant A, when if we'd ask a simple question or two, we might learn that he meant B. Because we don't ask for clarification, we jump to conclusions, and we believe we're right about our assumptions. And then we defend our assumptions and try to make someone else wrong. It's easier to ask questions and better to ask questions than to assume, because assumptions set us up for a fall. Sometimes we hear something that we don't understand. So rather than look like we're ignorant, we make assumptions about what it means, and again, we believe the assumptions we've just made. Then we defend our assumptions and try to make them the absolute case. And of course, we have no right to put words into other people's mouths just because we didn't hear them properly or because we made an assumption based on our opinion of that person. The stuff we carry around in our heads causes us to misinterpret and misunderstand all kinds of things. And we tend to see only what we expect to see and hear what we expect to hear. We assume that everyone sees and hears things the way we do, but they don't. What we think is based on our point of view, which is based on whatever it is we have chosen to agree to. We all have our own set of agreements that we have made with ourselves, and these agreements impact the way we interact with the world. You are a unique human being with a unique view of life, and everyone else is a unique human being with a unique view of life. And if you grew up where they grew up, and if you were taught what they were taught, you would believe what they believe. We shouldn't project our views onto others, but that's exactly what we do when we make assumptions. The bottom line, we make mountains out of molehills and create conflict where there is none by making assumptions and taking things personally. Years ago, I was going to be doing a show in a beautiful performing arts center. An acquaintance asked if I could get him a comp, which is what we refer to as a free ticket. And I, of course, said yes. And after the show was over, I expected him to come backstage and visit, but he didn't. Then I thought, well, surely he'll call the next day, but he didn't. And at this point, I started thinking all kinds of things. He didn't like the show. He was embarrassed to talk to me. Maybe he even hated the show. Why else would he have not acknowledged the show one way or another? All kinds of dark thoughts entered my mind. But then he called a couple of days later, and I learned that he had come to the show, but he started feeling very bad, and he decided he needed to leave early. And on the way home, he started feeling even worse. He went to the hospital emergency room where he was diagnosed and admitted for emergency gallbladder surgery. Now, I could have saved myself a lot of anxiety if I hadn't made assumptions. We could all, individually or collectively, spare ourselves a lot of disturbing and hurtful thoughts if we'd simply give up this bad habit. It seems to me that we're living in an era when there's a growing tide of intolerance. I say it seems that way because I haven't lived in another historical era, so I don't really have a proper perspective as to whether this is an unusually intolerant time or not. But it does seem that we're seeing an awful lot of us versus them attitudes that threaten to break people apart. So just as a thought experiment, imagine an isolated tribe, so remote that they've never encountered modern civilization. If you had been born into that tribe, you would grow up believing whatever they happen to believe. Rituals that our modern eyes would see as silly and perhaps even morally questionable would be seen as vitally important to your well-being, as ways to please whatever gods you believed in. You would grow up believing these things because you'd never been exposed to any credible alternatives. Living in your isolated tribe, you wouldn't know anything different or better. Well, we're all tribal, even if we're not isolated somewhere. We grow up believing whatever magical thinking our tribe believes. We grow up practicing rituals that to outsiders seem silly, perhaps even morally questionable. yet we believe them to be essential to our well-being. What we fail to realize is that the other tribes we interact with feel exactly the same way about how they were raised and what they believe. Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, liberal, conservative, urban, rural, any way you want to define us. We're all in tribes of one sort or another, all believing what we believe, and all believing that those other tribes are doing things that are silly and maybe even morally repugnant. So we tend to remain rooted in our beliefs, and we remain convinced that ours is the one true way, and that all others are, without question, wrong, silly, unacceptable, morally questionable, or worse, morally objectionable and worthy of eradication, cancellation, if you will. Even within our own tribe, our own group, we may pick up individual notions of what's right and what's good and what's acceptable, and that's fine for us. We need to know what we believe. It's when we assume that others should buy into our belief system that we start having problems. Making assumptions in our relationships is really asking for trouble. Often, we assume that the others, our partners, should know what we think and that we don't have to tell them what we want. We assume they're going to do what we want just because they know us so well. And if they don't do what we assume they should do, we feel hurt and say, "You should have known." One of the all-time great TV series was The Dick Van Dyke Show, and it still runs every day somewhere in the world. And the reason it remains relevant, despite being over 60 years old, is that it's based on human nature, which doesn't change. The plots occasionally revolved around Laura being upset with Rob, but not telling him what was wrong. He knew something was wrong, but when he asked her what it was, Laura would be evasive. And Rob would keep asking until finally she would cry, "If you really loved me, you wouldn't have to ask. You'd know." Well, have you ever said, "If you really loved me, you wouldn't have to ask what I want? You'd know"? Rob did love Laura, but he wasn't a mind reader. Possibly all of us have experienced something similar. What we want is so clear in our own minds that we can't imagine that the other person can't figure it out. Another game we play in relationships is trying to change the other person, what I refer to as the missionary complex. And it works like this. In the early stages of a relationship with someone you like, you must justify what you like about that person. You only see what you want to see, and you deny that there are things you don't like about that person. But there are things that bother you. And sooner or later, they will get your attention. So then you make assumptions, and one of those assumptions is, my love will change this person. Have you ever gone there? Oh, this person isn't exactly what I want, but my love will change him or her. We assume somehow that this person's going to be so happy with us that they're going to give up who they are to become who we want them to be. If you ever have gone there, tell me, has it ever worked? There's a Broadway musical with a great title, "I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change." But my love can't change anyone. If others change, it's because they want to change, not because I can change them. Real love is accepting people the way they are, rather than trying to change them into what you want them to be. The great scientist Albert Einstein had an interesting perspective on a lot of things in life, in addition to scientific matters. And he once said, "Women marry men hoping they will change. Men marry women hoping they won't. So each is inevitably disappointed. But Don Miguel writes that real love is accepting other people the way they are without trying to change them. If we try to change them, it means we don't really like them. Find someone whom you don't have to change at all. It's much easier to find someone who's already the way you want him or her to be instead of trying to change that person. Also, that person must love you just the way you are, so he or she doesn't have to change you at all. If others feel they have to change you, they mean they don't really love you just the way you are. Cue the Billy Joel. How much happier would we be if we stopped assuming and started really communicating? What would it be like if we started asking for what we really want? Other people are always free to say yes or no, but how much better is it to ask instead of hoping that they can read your mind? Don't make assumptions. And about now, you may be thinking, this sounds good, but how do I put this into practice? Well, here are just a few suggestions. First, instead of presuming that your partner or friend knows what you mean, take the time to ensure that they understand fully what it is that you expect from them. And then you won't be disappointed or hurt by their effort. Now, this is not the same thing as being demanding or issuing ultimatums. It's simply being clear about what you want, what you expect, and what you reasonably deserve. Secondly, on the flip side, if you're unsure of something with your partner or friend, don't assume that you know the answer. Ask for clarity to ensure that both of you get the result you want out of the situation. You need to know what the other person wants, expects, and deserves. So don't try to guess. Ask. Third, understand that whatever your partner or friend is doing is the perfect thing for them to be doing in their version of the world. They're doing the best they can considering who they are and what they believe. And just because it doesn't fit in your world doesn't mean it's wrong. And fourth, don't take anything or anyone too seriously. Often we get hurt by taking life too seriously. Lighten up. Life is here to be enjoyed, so don't take things personally or assume that others' intents were not kind. Just imagine what it would be like if you were to stop making assumptions with your partner, your friends, and everyone else in your life. Your way of communicating would change completely, and your relationships would no longer suffer from conflicts created by mistaken assumptions. And of course, when you don't make assumptions, your word automatically tends to become impeccable, and you tend not to take things personally. It's about being understanding and tolerant with others, and not assuming that they're just chomping at the bits to be more like you. It's about allowing them to be who they are and appreciating the fact that who they are will always be different from who you are. Until we realize that we are not the enlightened owners of the truth, our truth will make us rigid, intolerant, and difficult. Until we realize that there may, in fact, be more than one personal truth, we will tend to be arrogant and condescending. Until we realize that those who hold beliefs different from our own are no less intelligent and deserving of respect than we are, we will be actively engaged in promoting conflict. Until we accept true tolerance of those unlike ourselves, we will be cutting ourselves off from a lot of truly worthwhile people. Until we realize that one of us could just as easily be one of them, but for the quirk of where we were born and what we were taught. Our lack of empathy will sour our relations with much of humanity. until we realize that we are all equally valuable expressions of spirit. We'll just be cranky individuals and squabbling tribes. Don Miguel wraps up his chapter on assumptions by writing, "The day you stop making assumptions, you will communicate cleanly and clearly, free of emotional poison. With clear communication, all of your relationships will change, not only with your partner, but with everyone else. You won't need to make assumptions because everything becomes so clear. This is what I want. This is what you want." If all humans could communicate in this way, with impeccability of the word, there would be no wars, no violence, no misunderstanding. When you transform your whole dream, magic just happens in your life. What you need comes to you easily because Spirit moves freely through you. This is the mastery of intent, the mastery of the Spirit, the mastery of gratitude, and the mastery of life. This is the path to personal freedom. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions. Next week, we'll look at the fourth agreement. Always do your best. Until then, don't make assumptions. But if you must, always assume the best. Namaste.